Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you are tuning in from tonight. Maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. It was a foggy autumn evening in 1892, London, when the gas lamps struggled against the thick yellow mist. I had rarely seen Holmes so energized in weeks. Then came the urgent knock at our door. Professor Elias Hawthorne burst in, pale and trembling, with terrible news. At a grand dinner at the British Museum, a priceless medieval manuscript, the Codex Aurelius, had vanished, and its guardian, the wealthy Sir Reginald Voss, was found dead in a locked salon. Scotland Yard called it a simple heart attack. Holmes, however, saw what others missed. Within the hour, we were racing through the foggy streets toward the museum, the clatter of hansom cab wheels echoing in the night. Little did I know this case would lead us deep into a web of greed, poison, and deadly artistic obsession. Chapter 1. A case presents itself. It was a chill autumn in London, in the year 1892, when the fog wrapped the city in a damp, grey shroud, and the gas lamps struggled to pierce the thickening mist. The air carried the sharp bite of coal smoke, drifting from countless chimneys, blending with the distant briny tang of the Thames and the earthy scent of crushed leaves beneath carriage wheels. I had not seen Holmes so restless in weeks. He paced the sitting room at 221B Baker Street, his lean figure slicing through the aromatic haze of his pipe smoke, the rich Virginia blend filling the space with its warm, comforting depth. The Persian slipper bulged with shag tobacco, and my fingers rested idly on the cool, polished wood of the silent violin. Mrs. Hudson had just cleared the tea things. The strong Assam left a faint metallic aftertaste on the tongue from the overboiled water. The bell rang, sharply below, followed by heavy footsteps ascending the stairs, accompanied by the creak of aged wood and the rustle of a damp overcoat. Holmes paused, his grey eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "A client, Watson," he murmured, "and one in considerable distress, judging by that urgent tread." The door opened to admit a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s. His face was pale beneath a neatly trimmed beard. His frock coat of fine wool, still damp from the mist, showed traces of fresh mud on the boots that left dark smudges on our rug. He clutched a worn leather portfolio tightly under one arm, its surface smooth from years of handling. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice cultured, yet strained with the precise diction of a university scholar. "I am Professor Elias Hawthorne, of the British Museum's Department of Manuscripts. I come on a matter of the gravest urgency." Holmes gestured him to the armchair by the fire. The flames cast a welcome heat against the room's pervasive coolness. I poured brandy. The professor accepted with trembling hands, the glass clinking softly against his signet ring. The liquid spread a subtle, warming burn across the tongue, that cutting through the chill that seemed to have followed him indoors. "Tell us everything, Professor," Holmes said, settling opposite with steepled fingers. "Leave out nothing, however trivial it may seem." Hawthorne drew a steadying breath. The leather portfolio creaked under his grip. "Last night, at a private dinner hosted by the museum to celebrate the acquisition of a rare medieval manuscript, the Codex Aurelius, a lost 12th century work said to contain alchemical secrets of immense historical value. The manuscript vanished. Worse still, Sir Reginald Voss, our chief benefactor and a prominent collector, was found dead in the private salon adjacent to the dining hall. The physicians called it heart failure, but I fear foul play. The Codex was under his personal guard. I confess I noticed nothing unusual in the professor's manner at first, though perhaps you, dear reader, were more observant than I in those opening moments. The significance of his slight hesitation escaped me entirely. The professor described the glittering affair in the museum's grand hall. Crystal glasses rang with toasts, the heavy scent of roasted pheasant and spiced wine hung thick in the air, while the soft strains of a string quartet drifted from the anteroom. Voss, a robust man of 60 with a booming laugh, had retired briefly to the salon after the main course, claiming a need for quiet to examine the Codex one final time before its formal unveiling. When he failed to return, a servant found him slumped in a high-backed chair, the manuscript case empty beside him. No signs of forced entry. The salon door had been locked from within, or so the staff insisted. Scotland Yard believes it a tragic accident, Hawthorne said bitterly. The firelight gleamed on the sweat beading his brow. Inspector Lestrade called it natural causes, worsened by rich food and excitement. But Voss was in perfect health, and the Codex, priceless, irreplaceable. Its vellum pages held not only scholarly value, but potential insights into early chemistry that could transform our understanding of medieval science. Holmes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Describe the room precisely, Professor. The position of the body, the state of the manuscript case, any odd details whatsoever. Hawthorne obliged. The salon was small, panelled in dark oak that felt smooth and cool beneath the hand. It was furnished with well-worn leather chairs, soft from age, and a heavy mahogany table. Voss lay, half-sprawled, one hand still clutching a half-empty glass of port. The liquid's sweet, fortified taste no doubt lingered on his lips. The velvet-lined case for the Codex stood open on the table, its brass clasps unfastened but undamaged. No broken locks, no overturned furniture. Yet a faint chemical odor, sharp and acrid, like overboiled ink, mixed with something metallic, had clung to the air when Hawthorne entered. We departed within the hour. The hansom cab's wheels rattled over cobblestones slick with evening damp. The horses' hooves clopped rhythmically, blending with the distant calls of street vendors and the low rumble of omnibuses. Fog muffled every sound, turning gaslights into hazy orbs of yellow warmth against the encroaching cold. Yet at the British Museum, the grand edifice loomed, its stone facade cold and unyielding. Lestrade met us in the foyer, bowler hat in hand. The air was thick with the musty smell of old books and the faint scent of polished marble floors that chilled the soles of our boots. "Another of your wild theories, Mr. Holmes," he grumbled, though unease coloured his voice. The body had been removed, but the salon remained untouched at Hawthorne's insistence. Holmes moved through the room like a shadow. His magnifying lens glinted under the newly installed electric lights. He examined the port glass first, noting the faint crystalline deposit along the rim, fine as dust, almost invisible to the naked eye. "Observe, Watson," he said quietly, without looking up. "The liquid has separated slightly. There is a crystalline deposit along the rim." I peered closer. The glass felt cool and smooth in my hand. "Poison? Possibly," Holmes replied, "but not the obvious sort." He straightened and gestured to the carpet beneath the chair. "And here. The pile is disturbed in a precise pattern, as if something small and heavy was dragged briefly across it. The fibers are crushed in one direction only." The significance escaped me entirely. I wonder if it escaped you as well, dear reader. He turned to the manuscript case. The velvet interior showed faint indentations where the heavy vellum pages had rested. A single crimson silk thread clung to one brass clasp, out of place in the scholarly surroundings. Lestrade snorted. "Heart attack? Plain as day. The man was excited, ate too much. These scholars and their rich dinners." "Yet the door was locked from inside," Holmes remarked mildly. "How convenient for an accident. Tell me, Inspector, who were the last to see Voss alive?" Hawthorne listed the guests. Himself, Dr. Archibald Lang, the museum's curator of rare texts, a nervous man with ink-stained cuffs, Lady Eleanor Voss, Sir Reginald's young widow, elegant in black silk, Mr. Cecil Harrington, a rival collector, nursing old grudges, Miss Sophia Lang, the curator's daughter and a talented illustrator who had sketched the Codex, and Monsieur Pierre Duval, a French antiquarian visiting from Paris, whose cologne overpowered the room's mustiness. Holmes's first observations came as we continued our examination. He knelt by the chair, fingers tracing the wood's grain, only still faintly warm from earlier occupancy, but cooling rapidly in the night air. The glass was set down deliberately, Watson, no tremor in the hand that placed it, and that crimson thread, silk from a lady's gown or perhaps a gentleman's cravat, unusual in a scholar's domain. I failed to connect the details then. Perhaps you fared better. As we left the museum, the night air struck colder, carrying the distant chime of church bells and the faint, oily scent of lamp fuel from passing cabs. Holmes hailed our transport with a sharp whistle that cut through the fog. "The game is afoot, Watson," he said softly, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "This manuscript is no mere theft. It hides something far deadlier." The mystery pulled us forward into the shadows of London. Questions swirled like the mist around us. And what secrets did the Codex Aurelius truly hold? And who, among the dinner guests, had reason to silence Voss and claim it for themselves? I could scarcely imagine what awaited us in the days ahead. Chapter 2. Into London streets. The following morning dawned grey and raw, with a persistent drizzle that turned the pavements into slick, reflective surfaces under a leaden sky. The temperature hovered just above freezing, sending a sharp bite through our coats and turning every breath into a visible puff. Holmes and I set out first for the Voss residence in Mayfair, where the heavy oak door felt solid and unyielding beneath my knuckles, its polished brass knocker cold to the touch. Lady Eleanor Voss received us in a drawing-room, heavy with the cloying scent of funeral lilies, mingling with her own floral musk perfume that clung to the velvet drapes. She wore mourning dress of fine bombazine that rustled stiffly with each movement, the fabric slightly coarse against warmer silk underlayers. Her eyes were red-rimmed, yet her voice remained steady as she offered tea. The brew arrived hot and slightly bitter with tannin, its warmth a welcome contrast to the room's lingering chill. Reginald was devoted to his collections, she said, setting her cup down with a delicate clink on the saucer. The Codex was meant to be his legacy. Who would steal it and harm him in such a way? Holmes inquired gently about the dinner. Lady Eleanor recalled that Voss had excused himself after the fish course, complaining of mild indigestion from the rich sauces that left a greasy aftertaste. She had remained in the main hall, conversing with Monsieur Duval about Parisian auctions. The sounds of laughter and clinking silverware had filled the space until the alarmed cry echoed through the corridors. Consider the facts as we knew them then. The locked salon door, the faint crystalline deposit in the port glass, the single crimson silk thread on the case, and the disturbed carpet fibers beneath the chair. What would you conclude from such sparse beginnings? I set down these details precisely as Holmes observed them. The reader may draw their own conclusions. From Mayfair we proceeded once more to the British Museum. The hansom cab's interior smelled of damp wool and warm horse sweat, while the cracked leather seats felt cool beneath us. Dr. Archibald Lang met us in his cluttered office, where the air hung thick with the dry, papery scent of ancient tomes and the faint chemical tang of preservatives used on fragile documents. Towering bookshelves surrounded us, their wooden surfaces dusty and rough to the fingertips. Lang's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his spectacles, the metal frames cold from the room's persistent chill. The Codex was genuine, he insisted, his voice a nasal drone. I authenticated it myself. The vellum pages were illuminated with gold leaf that caught the light like living fire, but its contents hinted at transmutation processes, formulas that bordered on the heretical for its era. Holmes examined the doctor's cuffs, noting the dark ink stains against the white linen, stiff from dried residue. "You sketched the manuscript recently, Doctor?" Lang flushed. "For the catalogue, yes. My daughter Sophia assisted. She possesses a remarkably fine hand, with inks and pigments." Our next stop took us to Miss Sophia Lang's modest lodgings near the university, reached by a short omnibus ride. The vehicle's wooden benches vibrated with every jolt over the cobbles, the interior heavy with the odor of wet umbrellas and cheap pipe tobacco from fellow passengers. Sophia was a vibrant young woman of 22, her artist's smock smeared with charcoal and pigments that left an earthy smell on her fingers. Her small studio carried the sharp, resinous scents of turpentine and linseed oil, the canvases rough-textured beneath our hands. "I drew the codex under Father's supervision," she explained, her voice warm with enthusiasm, despite the somber circumstances. The illustrations were exquisite, dragons and alchemical symbols intertwined in gold. Sir Reginald permitted me a private viewing the day before the dinner. Holmes noted a small bruise purpling on her wrist against her pale skin. "An accident, Miss Lang." She hesitated, only briefly. "I tripped in the studio yesterday. How clumsy of me." Our third visit led us through the bustling Covent Garden markets on the way to Cecil Harrington's auction offices. The air buzzed with vendors' raucous cries, apples, fresh and sweet as summer, mingling with the earthy scent of root vegetables, bruised fruit, and the metallic clang of coins changing hands. The temperature rose noticeably amid the crowded stalls where bodies pressed close and generated a humid warmth that cut through the morning damp. Harrington's rooms beyond the market smelled strongly of heavy cigar smoke, pungent and lingering, overlaying the crisp, slightly yellowed pages of his leather-bound catalogues. Harrington, a portly man with a florid face, blustered at our questions. "Voss outbid me fairly on the Codex at Sotheby's last month. No hard feelings, merely business. You understand?" His handshake was firm yet clammy, the skin rough from constant handling of artifacts, yet his eyes darted nervously when Holmes mentioned the dinner guest list. Finally, we tracked Monsieur Pierre Duval to his hotel near Charing Cross. The lobby glowed warm from a crackling coal fire that spat and filled the space with the acrid bite of burning anthracite. Duval's suite carried the strong citrus and spice scent of his cologne, mixed with the faint musty odor from his traveling trunks, their leather straps stiff and tightly buckled. He greeted us with expansive Gallic charm, with his accent rolling richly, but his answers remained evasive regarding his keen interest in the Codex. "A beautiful object, monsieur. For scholarly study only, of course." Evidence continued to accumulate with each conversation. Dr. Lang displayed fierce protectiveness over the authentication process. Sophia possessed intimate knowledge of the manuscript's illustrations. Harrington nursed a clear financial grudge. Duval maintained suspicious international connections. Even Lady Eleanor's quiet grief masked questions about inheritance. Three men had enjoyed clear opportunity that fateful night. Three harbored motives tied directly to the manuscript's extraordinary value. Which would you suspect first, I wonder? As evening approached, the streets grew louder with the steady clip-clop of hansoms and the distant, piercing wail of a train whistle from nearby stations. We returned to Baker Street as the fog thickened once more, carrying the damp, riverine smell of the Thames from afar. Holmes lit his pipe, the tobacco glowing red in the bowl and sending lazy curls of aromatic smoke toward the ceiling. "Questions multiply, Watson," he said quietly, staring into the fire whose heat contrasted sharply with the cooler edges of the room. "The manuscript is hidden, not lost, and Voss's death was assuredly no accident. Tomorrow we shall delve deeper still into these troubled waters." Chapter 3. Deeper Waters. We returned to the crime scene the following afternoon. The British Museum's halls echoed softly with the shuffle of visitors' feet across the polished marble floors that gleamed with a slippery sheen. Then the air inside felt distinctly cooler than the mild outdoor temperature, carrying the perpetual musty odor of preserved knowledge and a faint waxy scent from the floor polish. The private salon appeared smaller in daylight, its dark oak paneling smooth and absorbent, swallowing much of the light from the tall windows. Holmes spent a full hour moving methodically through the room. His magnifying lens caught every detail under the electric lights. Significant evidence emerged when he carefully lifted the edge of the carpet near the chair. Beneath it lay a tiny shard of glass, no larger than a pinhead, its sharp edge catching the light. Close by was a dried smear of reddish-brown substance on the floorboards, flaky to the touch and emitting a faint, sharp chemical scent when disturbed, bitter and metallic. "This is no ordinary residue, Master Watson," Holmes observed. He scraped a small sample into an envelope, the paper crinkling crisply between his fingers. "Observe how it adheres to the wood grain. It suggests a volatile compound that evaporated quickly, yet left its trace behind." I knelt and peered at the smear. The floorboards felt cool and slightly uneven beneath my knees. The significance of its precise placement escaped me at the time. Holmes's reasoning unfolded naturally as we continued our examination. The port glass showed those crystals because the poison was not introduced in the bottle, but through a mechanism in the room itself, perhaps a small file broken underfoot or released by handling. The disturbed carpet fibers indicate something small and heavy was pulled away in haste after the deed. And that crimson silk thread, it snagged during the hurried removal of the codex. He referenced a past case in his usual conversational manner. "It reminds me of the affair of the missing naval treaty some years ago. A seemingly secure room yielded its secrets through the smallest traces left on the floor. A man believed his documents perfectly safe, yet the mud on a visitor's shoe and a single dropped button revealed everything, the ground, or, in this case, the floor. Watson remembers every passage and betrays those who walk upon it." The conclusion grew clearer with each observation. Sir Reginald Voss's death had occurred during the theft, disguised as natural heart failure through a sophisticated poison delivered subtly, perhaps via a rigged object in the salon or something the victim handled while alone. Complications arose when Inspector Lestrade arrived with fresh information. A kitchen servant recalled seeing Miss Sophia Lang near the salon shortly before Voss retired, carrying what appeared to be an artist's portfolio. Meanwhile, a telegram from Paris hinted that Monsieur Duval maintained ties to a shadowy network of antiquities dealers interested in alchemical texts for profit or other, less scholarly purposes. I did not fully understand then the import of these connecting threads, though I fancy some readers may have already guessed at the pattern forming beneath the surface. That evening, we visited a lively music hall in the East End, where Sophia had occasionally performed sketches in amateur theatricals to supplement her income. The venue pulsed with raucous energy, loud laughter, the blare of brass instruments, and the rhythmic stomp of feet on wooden boards that vibrated through the soles of our boots. The air was thick and warm with the mingled smells of gin, cheap tobacco smoke, sweat-dampened wool, and the oily aroma of fried sausages drifting in from street vendors. The temperature inside felt stifling compared to the cool night air outside, bodies packed closely, generating a humid heat. Sophia herself was not performing, but we spoke with the troupe's burly manager, whose booming voice carried easily over the din. "Quiet lass, but talented with the brush," he told us. "Always scribbling away. Seemed distracted lately, though." Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced the sitting room, the floorboards creaking rhythmically under his steps. His pipe smoke layered the air with its familiar aromatic warmth. The violin made a brief appearance, its strings singing a melancholy tune that filled the space with resonant, lingering notes before he set it aside. New understanding began to dawn as Holmes linked the tiny glass shard and chemical residue to a recent scientific paper on volatile compounds discussed openly at the university, material readily accessible to scholars such as Dr. Lang. The past case reference lingered in my mind, underscoring how the smallest physical details could unravel even the most carefully constructed deceptions. The net was tightening around our suspects, yet the Codex Aurelius remained hidden, its secrets drawing us ever deeper into the troubled waters of intrigue among London's scholarly and artistic circles. Who had wielded the poison with such precision, and where had the priceless manuscript vanished to amid the chaos of that fatal evening? I do Chapter 4. Shadows and Suspicions. Tension mounted steadily the following day as we pursued a series of short but revealing interviews across London. Our first stop was Harrington's Club, near Pall Mall. The leather armchairs were supple and well-worn from years of use, and the air hung heavy with the pungent aroma of fine cigars mixed with the faint metallic tang of polished decanters. Harrington blustered loudly about his alibi, yet his gold cufflinks, engraved with a distinctive pattern, matched a description of items glimpsed near the museum on the night of the dinner. From there we made our way to the bustling docks along the Thames. The river lapped coldly against the wooden pilings with a rhythmic slapping sound, its murky waters carrying the heavy, sewage-tinged stench blended with the sharp smell of tar from ships and the briny odor of fish holds. Warehousemen shouted over the constant clang of chains and the low creak of loading cranes. A trusted contact there revealed that Monsieur Duval had made discreet inquiries about shipping routes suitable for fragile and valuable artifacts. A quick detour took us to a small photography studio in Fleet Street, where Sophia Lang had recently sat for portraits. The developer chemicals stung the nostrils with their acrid, vinegary bite, while the dark room felt warm and humid from the trays of liquid. The glass plates were slick and cool to the touch. The proprietor remembered Sophia mentioning a secret project involving old manuscripts and detailed illustrations. False leads surfaced quickly. A rumor of a rival scholar arriving from Oxford proved baseless. His muddy boots, caked with country lane clay, did not match the reddish-brown residue found in the salon. Lady Eleanor's lady's maid provided a firm alibi involving an extended shopping excursion. Her testimony came in a quiet room, scented with lavender sachets and starched linen, the fabric crisp and cool beneath our fingers. 5 suspects now stood clearly in our sights. Dr. Lang showed scholarly access and an almost obsessive protectiveness over the Codex's authentication. Sophia possessed intimate artistic proximity and that unexplained bruise on her wrist. Harrington nursed a financial grudge from lost bids. Duval maintained suspicious international connections that could point to smuggling or espionage. Even subtle questions lingered around Lady Eleanor's potential gains from inheritance. The evidence pointed in several conflicting directions. I confess I was quite lost amid the contradictions. Were you any clearer at this stage, dear reader? We paused briefly in a small park near the university to collect our thoughts. The grass felt damp and springy underfoot, and the air carried a fresher, leafy scent that cut through the city's usual grime. Pigeons cooed softly while their wings fluttered in the branches overhead. Holmes sat on a weathered bench, its wood rough and cool to the touch, and steepled his fingers in thought. "Each suspect casts a shadow, Watson," he said quietly, "but one of them stretches far longer and darker than the rest." The net of suspicion was closing steadily around the guilty party. Yet the full truth of the hidden manuscript and Voss's death remained frustratingly elusive, concealed among the swirling autumn shadows of London. Chapter 5. The pursuit action erupted suddenly when a late afternoon tip from one of Holmes's street contacts led us to a derelict warehouse near the Thames docks at twilight. The pursuit began with a frantic hansom ride through narrowing streets, the cab wheels splashing noisily through puddles while the horse's breath steamed visibly in the rapidly cooling air. Thick fog rolled off the river, clammy and oppressive, carrying the overpowering stench of river mud, rotting vegetation, and coal dust from nearby foundries. The warehouse loomed ahead like a dark giant, its heavy wooden doors splintered and creaking on rusty hinges. Inside, the vast space echoed with the steady drip of water from the roof and the faint scurry of rats across cold stone floors, chilled by the river's proximity. We burst through the side entrance to find shadowy figures scrambling among stacked crates. A wild chase ensued through the labyrinth of cargo. The crates smelled strongly of damp burlap and exotic spices, their rough textures scraping against our coats as we pushed past. Shouts rang out sharply in the darkness, boots thudding heavily on uneven wooden planks. The cold metal of a lantern handle bit into my palm as I seized it, its flickering light casting wild shadows on the walls. Holmes moved with his usual precision, dodging obstacles and cornering one of the fleeing men against a pile of barrels. Key evidence came to light when Holmes forced open a concealed compartment in the floorboards. Inside lay fragments of the Codex Aurelius, torn vellum pages still recognizable by their delicate gold illumination and aged, slightly brittle texture that felt cool and heavy in the hand. Beside them rested a small, empty phial, its glass smooth yet faintly etched from chemical wear. The residue inside matched the shard and smear we had discovered in the museum salon. Holmes examined the items swiftly amid the fading chaos. "The poison was a custom compound, Watson," he explained, his voice steady despite the pursuit. "Derived directly from the alchemical hints contained within the Codex itself, then synthesized using modern chemical knowledge available at the university laboratories. The crystalline deposit in the port glass formed when the volatile substance mixed with the wine's natural acidity." He referenced another case, briefly, in his calm, conversational tone. "Much like the business of the speckled band, where an exotic method delivered death in a seemingly impossible manner. Experience has taught me to look beyond obvious toxins to the precise mechanism of delivery. In this instance, it was likely a modified sketching tool or inkwell that released the vapor when handled alone in the locked salon." The stakes rose sharply with the discovery of a small notebook tucked beside the file. Its pages linked one of our suspects directly to foreign agents keenly interested in the Codex's secrets, not merely for scholarly value, but for potential weaponization or leverage in matters of international intrigue. I admit my confusion reached its peak during those frantic moments of running and shouting in the dimly lit warehouse. The pieces refused to lock together cleanly in my mind. I wondered whether the reader had managed to assemble the physical clues more successfully than I had at that stage. The pursuit intensified as fresh footsteps echoed from deeper within the warehouse, drawing us closer toward the heart of the deception. Resolution now felt tantalizingly near, yet the full truth of the hidden manuscript and the identity of the murderer still hovered just beyond our grasp in the thickening riverside fog. Chapter 6. The Past Speaks. Criminal backgrounds began to surface clearly through careful examination of records, old newspaper clippings, and targeted conversations over the next day. Dr. Archibald Lang had once faced quiet accusations of overzealous restoration work on valuable artifacts, with whispers that he had altered documents to secure additional museum funding in his earlier career. Miss Sophia Lang's considerable artistic talent, while genuine, mastered deeper involvement in certain underground circles where detailed sketches of rare items occasionally found their way to private collectors for substantial sums. The signs had been present all along, in hindsight. The persistent ink stains on cuffs and fingers, the unexplained bruise from struggling with heavy volumes, and her unusual familiarity with chemical processes used in illumination and preservation. Motive grew sharper and more personal as the layers peeled away. Greed played its part, certainly, but intellectual obsession ran deeper. The Codex Aurelius promised not only financial reward, but the chance to rediscover lost alchemical knowledge and claim scholarly fame. The formulas hinted at processes that could be adapted with modern chemistry, turning medieval speculation into tangible, marketable discovery. Connections formed steadily between the seating arrangements at the fatal dinner, the crimson silk thread from Sophia's shawl that had snagged during the hurried theft, and the warehouse link initially suggested through Duval's shipping inquiries. Duval himself, however, proved largely a red herring. His evasiveness stemmed from pressing gambling debts rather than direct involvement in the murder. We spent the afternoon in the quieter corners of the university library, where the air carried the comforting dry scent of aged paper and leather bindings, their surfaces smooth yet cracked with time. The wooden tables felt cool and solid beneath our hands, while outside the tall windows the temperature had dropped further, sending a faint draught through the high-ceilinged room. Holmes reviewed old correspondence and attendance lists, his pipe occasionally sending aromatic curls of tobacco smoke into the still air, blending with the faint mustiness of the stacks. I found myself reflecting deeply on the human cost of such ambition. In this shadowy underbelly of London's scholarly world, where knowledge was both treasure and temptation, lives could be ruined or ended over a few vellum pages and the promise of intellectual glory. Sir Reginald Voss had died not merely for the object itself, but because he stood between the perpetrator and the exclusive possession of its secrets. Lady Eleanor's grief, though real, now carried the weight of unintended consequences, while the Lang family's once respectable name risked permanent stain. As evening drew in, the gas lamps outside flickered to life with a soft hiss, their warm glow contrasting with the growing chill seeping through the library windows. Holmes closed the final ledger with a decisive snap, the sound sharp in the quiet space. The pieces of the puzzle were connecting at last, forming a coherent and damning picture. The signs were there all along, if only we had seen them clearly from the very beginning, hidden not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday details of ink, thread, and quiet obsession that had surrounded us since the case first arrived at Baker Street. With the past now speaking loudly through evidence and motive, the path to resolution lay open before us. The hidden manuscript would soon be recovered, and justice, though delayed, stood ready to claim its due. Chapter 7. The truth emerges. The confrontation took place that same evening in the British Museum's private salon, the very room where the tragedy had unfolded. Holmes had arranged for all the principal suspects to gather under the pretext of a final review of the Codex's security. The air felt cool and heavy, with the familiar must of old books and floor polish, while the electric lights cast sharp shadows across the dark oak paneling. A low fire burned in the grate, its warmth barely reaching the edges of the room, where the temperature remained distinctly chill. When everyone had arrived, Dr. Lang, Miss Sophia, Lady Eleanor, Harrington, and Duval, Holmes closed the door with a firm click. He stood by the table where the empty manuscript case still rested, his eyes gleaming with quiet certainty. "Dr. Lang," Holmes began calmly, turning first to the curator, "your protectiveness over the authentication was admirable, yet it blinded you to what was happening under your own roof. The volatile compound used on Sir Reginald was synthesized in the university laboratory you both had access to." Lang's face paled, his ink-stained fingers clutching the back of a chair. The wood felt smooth and cool beneath his grip. Holmes continued without pause, his explanation flowing naturally through careful dialogue. The poison was not placed in the port wine itself. It was delivered through a specially modified sketching pen, a device that released a fine vapor when the cap was removed and the nib pressed to paper. Miss Sophia, you presented the pen to Sir Reginald in this very room under the guise of showing him your latest illustration of the Codex. He examined it alone, as you knew he would, and the vapor did its work swiftly and silently. The crystalline deposit formed as the compound mixed with the acidity of the wine. He sipped immediately afterward. The disturbed carpet fibers came from the small case you dragged away while he slumped in his chair. The crimson silk thread was torn from your shawl in the haste of that moment. Sophia Lang stood frozen, her face drained of color. The faint scent of turpentine still clung to her fingers from earlier work in her studio. The notebook, found in the warehouse, confirms the rest, Holmes went on. You intended to copy the most valuable alchemical sections, sell the knowledge discreetly, and return the original manuscript later as if it had been recovered. Your father suspected something was amiss, but chose silence out of familial loyalty. Monsieur Duval's inquiries were merely about shipping his own legitimate purchases, and Mr. Harrington's grudge, though real, never crossed into murder. Lady Eleanor's only fault was trusting those closest to her husband. Dr. Lang sank into a chair, the leather creaking softly under his weight. Sophia, how could you? I wanted the knowledge for myself, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackle of the fire. Father spent his life authenticating the work of others. I wished to create something lasting. The Codex offered that chance. When Sir Reginald insisted on keeping it under his exclusive guard, I saw no other way. Reactions rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor gasped, one gloved hand rising to her mouth, the soft fabric brushing her lips. Harrington muttered angrily under his breath, while Duval simply shook his head in disbelief, his cologne still cutting through the musty air. Holmes saw the truth immediately. I wonder how many of you saw it too, dear reader. In the small physical details, the ink stains, the artist's bruise, the misplaced thread, and the chemical residue that spoke so clearly once the mechanism was understood. Inspector Lestrade arrived moments later with 2 constables. The arrest unfolded with quiet efficiency. Sophia offered no further resistance as the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the metal cold and heavy. Justice had begun its course at last. As we left the museum into the night air, the distant chime of church bells sounded through the fog. Then and the faint oily scent of passing carriage lamps drifted on the breeze. Holmes lit his pipe, the tobacco glowing warmly in the bowl. The case is solved, Watson, he said simply. Yet it leaves a bitter taste. Ambition, when unchecked by conscience, can turn even the finest mind toward darkness. The truth had emerged at last, stark and complete, from the shadows where it had hidden for so long. Chapter 8. Justice. The arrest of Miss Sophia Lang unfolded with solemn efficiency outside the British Museum. That same night, 2 constables escorted her into a waiting police van, the iron doors clanging shut with a heavy finality that echoed across the stone courtyard. The night air had grown colder, carrying the damp, riverine smell of the Thames mixed with the acrid bite of coal smoke from nearby chimneys. Sophia's face remained pale but composed as she climbed inside, her artist's hands, still faintly stained with ink, now bound in cold metal cuffs that gleamed dully under the gas lamps. Inspector Lestrade stood beside us, adjusting his bowler hat against the chill. Well, Mr. Holmes, you've done it again. I'll grant you the poison pen was clever, rigged to release vapor when the nib pressed down. The girl confessed fully once we reached the station. She synthesized the compound herself in the university laboratory using notes from the Codex. She only meant to incapacitate Sir Reginald long enough to copy the key pages, but the dose proved fatal in the closed room. In the station interview room, later that evening, the air felt stuffy and warm from the coal stove, contrasting sharply with the cold drafts seeping under the door. Sophia sat at the plain wooden table, its surface scarred and rough beneath her fingertips. The gaslight hissed softly overhead, casting harsh shadows. She spoke quietly, but without evasion. I never intended murder, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Sir Reginald guarded the Codex so jealously, he would never have allowed me full access to study the alchemical formulas. With modern chemistry, those medieval hints could have led to real discoveries, perhaps even new pigments or medicines. I rigged the pen during my private viewing the day before. When he examined my sketch alone and pressed the nib to test the ink flow. The vapor escaped. The port masked any taste. I only wanted time to copy the sections and return the manuscript. Dr. Lang, waiting outside in the corridor, looked utterly broken. The musty scent of old books still clung to his coat, now mixed with the sharp tang of his own nervous sweat. My daughter, driven by the very passion I instilled in her, he murmured when we spoke with him. His ink-stained cuffs seemed heavier than ever, the fabric stiff and cold. Harrington, summoned as a witness, blustered in the outer office, his cigar smoke pungent and lingering in the warmer air. I knew something was off with that family, but poison, over a dusty old book. Lady Eleanor sat quietly nearby, her black silk dress rustling softly, the faint floral perfume she wore now overshadowed by the institutional smell of carbolic soap and damp stone. Questions received their final answers in the hours that followed. The full manuscript had been hidden in Sophia's studio. They'd wrapped carefully in oilcloth inside a false-bottomed portfolio. Its vellum pages felt thick and cool, the gold illumination still bright under the station lamp. Only a few sections had been copied before the murder. The rest remained intact. The foreign agents Duval had been seen with were confirmed as unrelated, mere buyers of lesser antiquities. The gambling debts that made him evasive were settled quietly the next day. The impact on others unfolded gradually. Lady Eleanor inherited the collection as intended, though her grief now carried the added weight of betrayal by someone she had trusted in her husband's circle. Dr. Lang tendered his resignation from the museum the following morning, the decision delivered in a trembling voice amid the cool marble halls. The scholarly community buzzed with shocked whispers for weeks. The scandal spreading through university common rooms, thick with pipe smoke and the aroma of strong tea. Nothing in my experience prepared me for the full darkness of this revelation. Though Holmes had suspected the artistic connection early on through the thread, the bruise, and the chemical traces, a young woman of genuine talent had turned her skill toward murder for the sake of hidden knowledge. The human cost felt heavier than any mere theft could justify. As we left the police station near midnight, the streets lay quiet under a fresh layer of fog. The distant rumble of a late omnibus mixed with the soft clip-clop of a lone hansom. Holmes walked beside me, his pipe sending occasional warm puffs of Virginia tobacco into the cold night air. "Consequences unfold slowly, Watson," he said quietly. "Justice has claimed its due, and yet the ripples will touch many lives long after the manuscript returns to its proper place." The case moved into its final phase. Order, though shaken, began its slow restoration amid the shadows of Victorian London. Chapter 9. Restoration. The legal conclusion came swiftly in the weeks that followed. Miss Sophia Lang appeared before the magistrate at Bow Street, the courtroom heavy with the scent of polished oak benches and old varnish that felt smooth yet slightly sticky under the hand. The air carried a faint chill from the high windows, contrasting with the warmer press of bodies in the public gallery. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter rather than murder, her voice steady as she described the unintended lethality of the vapor in the confined salon. The judge, his robes rustling softly, sentenced her to 15 years penal servitude, citing the premeditated nature of the device despite her claim of accident. The gavel's sharp rap echoed like a final punctuation, ending the formal proceedings. Dr. Archibald Lang was cleared of any direct involvement. His only failing had been silence born of paternal love, and the museum board accepted his resignation with quiet regret rather than prosecution. He retreated to a small cottage in Kent, where the air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke from cottage fires, far from the musty halls he once commanded. Lady Eleanor Voss, now sole guardian of her late husband's collection, ensured the Codex Aurelius was returned to the British Museum under stricter safeguards. She visited Baker Street one crisp afternoon to express her gratitude, in her morning dress replaced by deep violet silk, that whispered against the carpet, the faint, floral perfume she wore mingled pleasantly with Mrs. Hudson's fresh-baked scones, their warm, buttery aroma filling the sitting room. "I shall never look at illuminated manuscripts the same way again," she said, setting down her teacup with a delicate clink. The tea tasted rich and slightly tannic, a comforting warmth against the autumn chill pressing at the windows. "Reginald's legacy will endure, but not at the cost of further lives." The innocent were fully vindicated. Monsieur Duval returned to Paris without stain on his reputation, his citrus-spiced cologne and expansive manner no longer viewed with suspicion. Cecil Harrington resumed his auction business with renewed vigor, his portly figure once more seen in the markets of Covent Garden, where vendors' cries mixed with the earthy scent of vegetables and the metallic ring of coins. The false leads and red herrings that had once confused us now seemed almost inevitable. In hindsight, each rooted in ordinary human failings rather than criminal intent, futures took shape in the quiet aftermath. Sophia's artistic talent, once promising, would find limited expression behind prison walls, perhaps through permitted sketches that carried the sharp scent of cheap ink and rough paper. Her father wrote occasional letters describing long walks along country lanes where the texture of damp leaves and the distant lowing of cattle replaced the bustle of London. Lady Eleanor established a small scholarship in her husband's name for young illustrators at the university, ensuring that talent would be guided rather than twisted by ambition. Normalcy returned gradually to Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson resumed her cheerful routines, the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread drifting up the stairs each morning. The sitting room felt warmer, with the fire crackling steadily, its heat pushing back the cooler drafts from the windows. Holmes returned to his chemical experiments, the faint, acrid tang of reagents mixing with the aromatic smoke of his pipe. I took up my pen once more, recording notes in my journal, the paper crisp and the ink flowing smoothly across the page. Looking back on the case, I found myself reflecting on how the clues had lain hidden in plain sight among the sensory chaos of London. The ink stains, the crimson thread, the chemical residue, and the artistic passion that had turned deadly. And the signs were subtle, yet unmistakable. Once illuminated by Holmes's keen observation, order was restored at last. The Codex Aurelius rested once more in its proper place under glass in the museum, its vellum pages protected and its secrets safeguarded for future scholars. The shadows that had darkened that fatal dinner lifted, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of justice served and lives allowed to move forward, however changed. The city continued its ceaseless rhythm beyond our windows. The distant rumble of omnibuses, the calls of street vendors, and the soft patter of autumn rain on the panes. In time, another case would no doubt arrive at our door, but for now, a measure of peace had returned to the world of 221B Baker Street. Chapter 10. Baker Street Reflections. The fire crackled cheerfully in the grate at 221B Baker Street, casting a warm, flickering glow across the familiar sitting room. It was a quiet evening, some weeks after the conclusion of the case, with a gentle rain pattering against the windows and the faint, damp scent of the London streets drifting up from below. Mrs. Hudson had brought up a fresh pot of tea, its rich Assam aroma mingling pleasantly with the smoky warmth of the burning coals and Holmes's Virginia pipe tobacco. The leather armchair felt supple and well-worn beneath me, while the polished wood of the table held the cool weight of my notebook. Holmes lounged opposite, his long legs stretched toward the fire, eyes half-closed in contemplation. The violin lay silent on the side table, its strings still and gleaming softly in the firelight. For once, the restless energy that had driven him through the investigation had settled into a rare moment of domestic calm. The morning papers had carried the final echoes of the affair. A brief notice announced that the Codex Aurelius had been formally reinstated in the British Museum's collection under enhanced security protocols. Sophia Lang's sentence was confirmed, and Dr. Lang's quiet retirement to the countryside was noted without scandal. The article carried the musty scent of fresh newsprint, its pages slightly rough under my fingers as I folded it away. "An instructive case, Watson," Holmes remarked at length, tapping the ash from his pipe into the tray. The tobacco glowed red for a moment, before fading. It demonstrated how passion for knowledge, when divorced from ethics, can prove as dangerous as any weapon. The physical evidence spoke clearly once we listened. The silk thread, the chemical residue, the artist's tools turned lethal. Yet it required connecting them through the lens of human motive. I nodded, sipping my tea. The liquid was hot and slightly bitter, a comforting contrast to the cooler draughts that occasionally slipped through the window frames. I must confess the artistic connection eluded me for some time. The bruise, the ink stains, the sketching pen, all seemed so innocent in isolation. Only when you revealed the mechanism did the full picture emerge. Holmes smiled faintly, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight. "You know my methods, Watson. Observation of the smallest details, reasoned through experience. The ground, or in this case, the salon floor and the warehouse boards, always remembers. Now, much like our earlier adventures, the truth lay not in dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet betrayal of material traces." We spoke at length of the broader implications. The case had highlighted the growing tension between traditional scholarship and the temptations of modern science. The Codex's alchemical hints, once merely historical curiosities, now carried the potential for real discovery or misuse. London's intellectual circles, from university halls thick with the scent of old books and pipe smoke to the bustling auction houses with their crisp catalogues and cigar-laden air, would no doubt tread more carefully in future acquisitions. Greed and obsession remained eternal dangers, whether in the slums or the drawing rooms of the elite. I reflected on the transformations we had witnessed. The criminal, they once concealed behind talent and familial loyalty, now faced the consequences of her actions in a distant prison cell where the air likely carried the sharp tang of carbolic and the rough texture of coarse uniforms. The innocent parties, Lady Eleanor, Dr. Lang, even the blustering Harrington, had emerged with their lives reshaped but intact, able to move forward amid the ceaseless rhythm of the city. Holmes himself had moved from restless engagement to triumphant resolution, his mind already turning toward new puzzles, and I, as ever, had passed from puzzlement to deep admiration for the clarity of his insight. To those who followed this account through the fog and shadows of Victorian London, I offer this final word. The truth often hides not in grand gestures or impossible puzzles, but in the quiet details of everyday betrayal and unchecked ambition. The crimson thread, the faint chemical trace, the misplaced bruise. These were the silent witnesses that spoke when human voices faltered. May we all learn to observe more keenly, for the city's streets hold endless stories, and justice, though sometimes delayed, ultimately finds its path. The rain continued its soft rhythm against the glass, a soothing counterpoint to the fire's crackle. Holmes reached for the violin at last, drawing the bow gently across the strings. A soft, melancholy air filled the room, its resonant notes blending with the warmth of the hearth and the comforting sense of home. The case was closed, another victory for reason in a world full of mysteries. As the music faded into the quiet night, a profound sense of satisfaction settled over us both. Baker Street lay peaceful once more, ready for whatever the morrow might bring.